All right, awesome. It looks like we're live. Thank you for joining another episode of BIMS Dives. Today, we'll be diving into maritime heritage with Dr. Ayana Flewellen. I'm Rose Santana, and we're so excited to have Dr. Flewellen on live with us today.
Hey, so excited to be here.
Okay, so Dr. Flewellen is a Black feminist, an archaeologist, which is super cool because I didn't even think that was something that, we as Black folks did, a storyteller, and an artist. She's the co-founder of the Society of Black Archaeologists and sits on the board of Diving with a Purpose, which some of you might have actually seen on our social media because it's a super cool organization, and we can't hear a little bit more about it later on. Currently, Dr. Flewellen is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at Stanford University. So you started that this year in July, correct?
Yes.
So how's it been, first of all? Because we always hear about Stanford, as one of the big universities. How are they treating you, first of all?
Yeah, Stanford's treating me really well, I must say. It's been a really sweet transition. I think the biggest sort of challenge for me is like relocating to a new city, getting the office set up, getting the lab set up, but it's been a really fantastic experience. And it's been really nice for me just being in deeper conversation and in closer community with other historical archaeologists. So while we might be doing things in various parts of the world, it's just really interesting to sort of sit in the space where folks are thinking about material culture in really meaningful ways.
Okay, so I have to ask because I was like a huge nerd when I was a kid and I always thought I wanted to be an archaeologist. What's one of the coolest places you've been?
The coolest places that I have been for an archaeological dig, I feel like, wow, what a great question. I'm shameless plug. So the site that I currently work on is on the island of St. Croix in the US Virgin Islands. And it's an 18th century Danish sugar plantation. And I absolutely love it. And we're actually excavating where the enslaved laborers lived on that site while they labored in this really grueling environment. So it's been a fantastic experience that's both terrestrial, it's on the coast, so it has this maritime component to it, thinking about the sort of ecological connections that enslaved Africans made during that time period. So it's been a lot of fun. Hey, Andrea.
Hey, everybody. I apologize. I'm down here in the Keys and all the power's gone out and I had to drive around trying to get Wi-Fi and electricity. So I apologize for being late and welcome to. Are we live now?
We are.
We are. Oh, hey, everybody. Sorry, I'm late. I'll follow your lead, Rose.
Okay, so earlier today, we asked our audience members over social media what they think about when they hear the term maritime heritage. At the end of our chat, we'll go over a couple of answers, but for now, can you give us your perspective on maritime heritage in the ocean environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm formally trained as a terrestrial archaeologist, and I got into diving and maritime work in 2016. And for me, maritime archaeology, maritime heritage is really thinking about the wonders and the history that really lies in the waterways and oceans that surround us. And that includes, I think most people readily turn to, for instance, these large shipwrecks that are recovered and found underwater, especially with the work of Diving with a Purpose. Andrea and I have both worked on the Tuskegee Airmen Project, which is a submerged plane vessel from World War II that was in the Great Lakes area. So there are several different kinds of maritime heritage sites. Those are like archaeological ones that I'm bringing up. But then also maritime heritage are also these archaeological sites that happen to be underwater. So you can think, for instance, in Jamaica, Port Royal, that like collapsed into the ocean is now a maritime heritage site, but it initially was not. You see that akin to a lot of burial spaces that are along the coast as well, in spaces like Louisiana, or in Georgia, where you actually have African American burial grounds that, due to shifts in climate change and waterways, these burial grounds are being impacted by soil erosion and are becoming maritime sites. Similarly, there are several indigenous sites that are also now underwater archaeological sites due to the shifting environment and shifting climate. So for me, maritime heritage is our heritage that's submerged, and it can look in a variety of different ways.
That's amazing. I never thought about how climate change is causing maritime heritage.
Absolutely. Or even thinking about how for a lot of even if you think about shipwrecks, for instance, the ocean is, I think, very animate in so many ways. And in particular, when you think about hurricanes that are moving through the Caribbean, you actually see large sections of sand and silt shifting along the ocean floor that is literally uncovering and then burying various heritage sites. So just as our sort of topography on land is shifting, and we see that more readily with climate change happening, the same is occurring underwater as well. And it's bringing about these new discoveries in many ways.
Is that going to help us with that search of the, is it the Henrietta Marie? Is that the one we're looking for? Been looking for a while?
The Guerrero that's down
The
there.
Guerrero, that's what I'm thinking of, Guerrero, yeah. Will that help? Hopefully it will help us find it.
Hopefully they find it. I know there's been a lot of data that has pointed to various sort of areas in that vicinity. And the hope is that they actually get a sort of definitive yes in the summer of 2023. So we're crossing fingers and toes. But NPS has been doing a lot, NOAA as well, to really track down the archaeological remains of that wreck site.
Awesome. Do you want me to take the next one, Rose? Okay, awesome. So Ayana, I've been diving with you a lot in several places, and it's been an honor to work with you. But I think the listeners are really curious. How did you become a scuba diver, and why did you become a scuba diver?
Yeah. So I grew up in Miami, Florida. So I grew up in an area that was I know I still got a 305 area code cell phone number. Like I'm from Miami, you know? But I grew up around water, and my grandmother and my mom would take me to the beach all the time, and we never dove. Like we would be on the shore, we would be in shallow water, maybe we would go snorkeling, but it was never a thing to go diving. And it wasn't until 2016 when I met Jay Hagler, who was then a board member for Diving with the Purpose, that was at the Society for Historical Archaeology's conference, because he was in a meeting with the Slave Wrecks Project, which is the Smithsonian, which is a joint venture between the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, George Washington University, Ezekiel Museums, Diving with a Purpose, National Park Service, large international organization. But they were meeting at that conference, and Jay had reached out to Justin Donovan, a co-conspirator and colleague of mine, really interested in training archaeologists who were Black, who had done terrestrial work, to do maritime work, because the field of archaeology is so is not as inclusive as we would like it to be. And less than 1% of all practicing archaeologists are Black. And the number is even fewer when you think about practicing archaeologists that do maritime work. The first woman to get her degree in maritime archaeology was Grace Turner in 2008. So it's like, though, like it is a field for African American engagement that quite literally is in bloom, right? So I was never introduced to it throughout my entire undergraduate or graduate career as a terrestrial archaeologist. And it wasn't until meeting Jay and being introduced to Diving with a Purpose and seeing divers who looked like me doing such meaningful work around Black history globally, that I was like, oh, I want to be a part of this. And I'm so thankful for the invitation to be a part of this. But it's organizations like DWP, it's organizations like NABS, the National Association for Black Scuba Divers, that presents the representation necessary for people to be like, oh, I can do this. Because I certainly was someone who didn't say that for myself until I saw y'all doing it.
I'm so glad you said that because when I first met Andrea, we were doing a BIMS dive week. I think that was the first time I've actually seen a Black scuba instructor, and I was so stoked about that. I hadn't seen that many people of
That's
color
super cool.
diving anyways, but like an instructor.
Yeah, you don't see it. And even for me, like I got my open water training in Austin, Texas, in Lake Travis, which is green and murky. But the woman who taught me and prepared me for diving with the purposes maritime archaeology training was actually a woman named Jenny Mack, who for a long time had been doing work with the National Association of Black Scuba Divers, still is, and for a long time ran the youth training program that NABS has down in Honduras when she was co-directing that. So she was the one who literally, like, I drove from Austin to Dallas. I would spend the weekend at her house and we would go practice my buoyancy, practice basic mapping skills, writing under things like that at the local YMCA in Dallas, Texas. And it was because this Black woman who was the scuba instructor opened up her home to me and like saw in me potential. And she was like, yeah, if you can get up here, I'll do it. So I'm always going to be indebted to her for the yes that she took on me.
I love that. I just want to add my little 2 cents. I love the fact, and that's what we do. I think because of who we are as a people, we always are working to lift each other up. And whenever any of us can help, we always volunteer and we're there to help and make sure the next generation of sea stewards are ready and able to do what you're doing and what's coming behind you. I love it. It's like someone said in the chat that their heart is full. Mine is full. So I'm getting goosebumps now just thinking about this. I love this. Love it, love it, love it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, Rose, you're muted.
Yep, Zoom just told me that. It's a great segue into our next question. How did your scuba diving background and archaeology background influence what you do now?
Yeah, I mean, my scuba diving background and my archaeology background are completely everything that I do now. I think I've been really fortunate to be able to build a career doing this work. I am someone who came to archaeology in a very roundabout way. I enjoyed museums. I was an undergrad, didn't know what I was going to do for the first 2 years. And in that last year that I was there, took an archaeology of African American life and history class, where I actually saw myself in the field and discipline, and I haven't looked back since. So this work, both on land and underwater, has really allowed me to touch history in very tangible ways. The work with diving with a purpose has led me to be able to dive on the Clotilda site in Mobile, Alabama. My work with terrestrial archaeology has allowed me to literally hold, fragments of dolls that enslaved children have touched, played with, the plates that enslaved and later free African Americans ate off of. I run my hands against the very walls that our ancestors called their homes. Like, it brings this history so alive, especially during this time period where so much of the kind of work being done to erase and re-envision the history of this country, their archaeology is like at the forefront, should be at the forefront of really presenting the tangible evidence of our existence and our triumphs and our resilience on this land.
Right, like that, yeah, 100% agree with all that you just stated. Making those connections and then bringing us all, I don't say full circle because we have a ways to go, but we're still making those connections. And that brings me to some of the work that you've been doing. You have a project called the Black Oceanic Breath, which I think is incredibly powerful. Can you please share with the audience a breakdown of what this project means and what your goal is for this project?
Yeah, so this project, I think, really for me sits at the intersection of social sciences, humanities, and embodied art. And it's a project that's really thinking through how we remember and commemorate the past and our relationship, African American people's relationship to the Atlantic Ocean, actually in the ocean. And it really asks us what's possible to sort of envision for a Black future when we do that manifesting, conjuring, healing work underwater. And it really begs us to think that the ways in which we commune with water, be it like submerged, how it actually physically changes how we see and sense the world and see and experience ourselves, allows us to think through new ways of Black being. So the project itself, which has looked right now like an almost autoethnographic sort of practice of me diving in the water and doing different practices around journaling and writing. I'm really excited to expand that outward and actually start interviewing Black divers who are working on these sites of African diasporic submerged history and really asking these questions around healing and remembering and commemoration in the body while it's underwater. So the project itself feels like it's expanding in a lot of really exciting ways, and I don't always know the direction of it. But one of my artist friends, LaVon Bell, she told me when you get into the waters of not knowing what you're doing, that's when you're actually making art. So I'm waiting in it right now.
You mentioned earlier about the Tuskegee Airmen Project, and I have been working with it, and it's still this past summer, and making that connection, knowing that we are retrieving a part of our history. And then also bringing Lieutenant Colonel Frank Moody died in that crash, and it was his plane. So knowing that this young man was only 22 years old when he passed away and was killed in that accident. But I remember the first time I ever saw the Tuskegee star on the wing of his plane. I remember literally crying underwater because I'm like, oh my God, I'm helping bring this family, this man's plane so they can see this. They're not going to actually have it, but still bringing up a part of history and letting his family be a part of it, having that connection to it, and just knowing that I'm doing something very meaningful and powerful through water, being underwater. It's amazing. Yeah, and I like the connections that you're making through all of this. So on point.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, you mentioned earlier a little bit about how it's healing. And I think that's always super fascinating to me because, we always get stupid comments about they're like, oh, well, Black people don't swim or Black people don't dive. So the fact that you're actually sort of taking something that's historically not been really for us or where we weren't really welcomed in and turning it into something that's now healing and helping people work through that. And we're sort of able to reclaim that history a little bit on our terms, not on anybody else's. I think that's something that's really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like within your sharing, like the part about it not being welcoming for us really. So like when we think about the kind of false narrative that like swimming isn't for us, that we don't actually enjoy water, all of that is actually tied to a racialized history of us being excluded from those spaces. Literally, like one of my favorite beaches in Florida is Crandon Park, which is the beach that my grandmother would take me to. And it's one of the oldest historical Black beaches in Florida. And it's a Black beach because African Americans were not allowed on other beaches in Florida. Pools were deeply segregated for so long that African Americans literally were not allowed access to pools to learn how to swim, which is why like programs at Howard that demand that their undergraduates learn how to swim before they graduate are so important. And it's the same thing with scuba diving. So much of, if you think about the earliest scuba divers, were African Americans connected to the military, right? And the military has opened up so many experiences for African Americans, even in that contentious sort of history of, the military itself and whether or not it's necessary and blah, 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 blah. But the reality that like how many doors it actually opened for African Americans to engage in these kinds of activities, for them to travel to various parts of the world and do it, you know, it opened up a whole entire new framework for Black recreational and leisure life. So those are all like, you know, part of that sort of narrative around reclaiming our actual connection and history with water. And even deeper than that, I think of this book called Undercurrents of Power that talks about the longstanding historic connections that Africans, enslaved Africans, had to water, and how they brought those skill sets with them across the Atlantic and were used in varying enterprises, be it fisheries and pearls, or what we see on St. Croix, which is harvesting coral for architecture. So there are longstanding histories that really account for not only African Americans and African diasporic people enjoying the water, but being masters at the skill and craft of being in the water, that we should really hold on to as we're like reinvigorating these connections in the present.
I'm curious, this is not on our, I have a question about the connection of this internalized fear, generational fear of being afraid of water. And where does that come from? I remember history, one of my professors sharing with me how the colonizers use on different islands in the Caribbean, use the water as a fence and told them that they would get hurt or killed if they went there. So those that were enslaved internalized that, then taught that to their children, who taught that to their children. So generation from generation are now afraid of the water. So what do you, can you share your thoughts on that and what that means and how do we break that chain, that cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer that transgenerational trauma is a thing. And that, you know, the kinds of trauma experienced by our ancestors, I have deep ties that go back like to 1850s in Texas. Like my people were enslaved here and labored here, were brought across the Atlantic here. And I don't take that for granted when I think about the work that I'm doing in the water, when I go up to the Atlantic and understand the history that's held in those spaces. We bring and carry so much of that with us. It's in our blood, and we don't, it's not forgotten. And depending upon your own sort of spiritual inclinations and what you feel like you walk with, I feel like I walk with my ancestors all the time, and I hold with them my memories and theirs as well, you know? So really being able to tend to those precarious relationships do so much healing for us, for our ancestors, as well as for like the prospects that we have for future generations as well. Like I think about the very low number of Afro-Caribbean students, kids on St. Croix who know how to swim. And they're on an island, obviously surrounded by water, where year after year, young children are dying because they don't know how to swim. And of course, part of it is like access to swimming pools, access to swimming lessons. And then part of it is also this transgenerational trauma attached to water as well. So there's so much that has to be tended to. And I really do wonder, especially with the work with Black Oceanic Breath, you know, what it means to actually bring people to the water to develop a new relationship with it, where we're not just tourists, but in a space of communion there. You know, you could stay at 20 feet for quite some time. So what happens if you pull out a journal and start drawing, writing, thinking through, you know, your history, your mother's history, your grandparents' history, what will come up for you in those spaces? I'm really excited to know what the answer is.
I mean, even for me, I'm from Dominican Republic. You know, my whole family is, and I remember being a kid, I didn't grow up knowing how to swim. I learned how to swim as an adult. You know, there was always sort of this inherent fear of the ocean and the water, which is why everybody's like, why are you trying to be a marine biologist? We don't go there. So for me, it was like really interesting. Like one of my cousins almost drowned when we were younger, and that was like a very traumatic experience where my entire family was like, well, we're not getting like further in than waist deep. Like, how do we combat that inherent fear that we just have and like open up a space where like, okay, let's take the whole family to the beach. Let's go sit in the water. Let's go try to snorkel. Like, how do we get over that?
Yeah, I feel like, the work that DWP and NABS is doing does that. Providing access to open water classes at little to no cost does that. Providing these like programs for youth to actually get them in the water does that kind of work. And it's slow moving, Like one of the things that I love so much about Jay and Doc Jones and Ken is that Kamal Siddiqui, these are folks, Jimmy Mack, these are people who moved slowly with me. If you ever go through a recreational diving open water class, you could take a class over a weekend and they'll give you a certificate and they'll tell you that you can dive, but it actually doesn't like do the kind of slow process work of being in deeper communion relationship with the ocean and oceanic environment around you, right? And NABS, within the trainings that they do, within the dive programs that they offer, they move at a slower pace, right? And it's in that slower pace and training that you really tend to people's needs in those environments and really guide them through the process of being in this new space. And I've always been just so grateful for the time that they take, the breath that they allow in a field or in like an environment, I should say, especially within like the tourism industry and this sort of capitalist environment around scuba diving, that really wants a quick turnaround. You get a certificate, you get a certificate, you get a certificate. And there's not this sort of larger conversation around how we actually tend to be in communion with the ocean, care for the ocean, as we're also like caring for ourselves and healing ourselves.
That was great because Asia Swift just asked if you have any additional reading or recommendations about African and African diaspora and the relationship to water. So do you have anything to recommend?
I mean, I would turn immediately to Kevin Dawson's Undercurrents of Power that looks at the history of African and African diasporic people's relationships to the water from prior to enslavement through the present. I would also pick up Alexis Pauline Gumbs' Undrowned as well, that talks about human relationships to marine environments and also what marine creatures can teach us about being better humans, which is really fantastic. And then I just got, I got a whole bunch of stuff over here. I haven't read this yet, but I just got this book called Troubled Waters, Tales from the Deep, which is an edited volume of just like short stories that are science fiction or speculative fiction in relation to like people's relationship to water. So I'm excited for that. There's also like other books like River Solomon's The Deep that I really deeply admire. If you're looking for like art, Ayana Jackson has a fantastic new exhibit that's either out or in the works that also is looking at Blackness and Black, becoming and undoing underwater in really creative ways. So there are so many people right now that are in conversation with the water, which I think, is really a testament to the ways that the ocean is really calling out for us, that we all seem to be so in tuned and looking towards the ocean for guidance and also towards the ocean for the kinds of possibilities that we want to see for ourselves through its longevity. So yeah.
You're muted.
I know, I'm like, duh. Did we ask this question of you? How does today's societal issues impact your art? What are the connections to that?
Yeah, I feel I feel like, you know, I like when I mentioned these sort of larger threads that we see around attacks to our education system, how they're like all of this sort of like language around, you know, we got to get critical race theory out of our schools, and you can't, they wouldn't even know how to define critical race theory if you asked them. But what they're ultimately asking us to do is to not share the full sort of historical complexity of how this country came into being. And you know, that kind of work, that kind of sort of quest and drive really, I think, is the reason why this work right now with archaeology is so important. As I mentioned, and I've said in other interviews, you know, you can't deny enslavement when I present you with the shit, like the very real sort of importance, for instance, of the Clotilda, which was the last known vessel to bring enslaved Africans into this country. The importance of that vessel is that you could see specifically with the Clotilda, the immediate connections between enslavement, the legacy of enslavement, and the actual livelihoods of descendants today in Africatown, Alabama. It is such a unique case study that is demonstrative of how the experience of Blackness is in this country more broadly. You can't deny it. The ship itself is there. You can't deny it. The community is there on grounds that quite literally have been polluted by the white family who enslaved their ancestors. You can't deny that. So I think like the materiality, like the actual physical objects themselves, make the kind of quest for revisionist histories impossible in my eyes, but you know, people still make up things. But you know, I think it's truly hard, you know, to deny the traumas of slavery when you can walk into the Smithsonian African American History and Culture Museum and actually see shackles that could have only fit the ankles of children. Like you can't deny that, you know? Yeah.
I want to ask, with all of this revisionist history that's gone on for centuries, what are we going to do to tell the true story, the whole story of not only this country, but of the world and Black and brown people that have been totally excluded from true history? We need to tell our story. I'm gonna say it that way. Tell what are we doing? You think you were talking about how methodically NABs and DWP and all those involved were slow and methodical in getting you educated and trained up.
Yeah.
We need to transfer that over to telling our story, which we're doing, but I would love to see it happen yesterday. But get that story told, and how are we going to retell that and put it so that our contributions are where they ought to be?
Yeah.
What are we going to do about that? How are we going to make that happen?
That's such a huge question.
I know.
So I have like a thing in my mind. I always feel like I'm some kind of like old timer, but as someone who like loves, like I really do, I love museums, right? But I think that there's a way that museums, zoos, aquariums, like there are so many ways that I think as a society we've compartmentalized where we learn things. You learn history at a museum, right? You learn about the ocean at the aquarium. You learn about nature at a campsite. Like, I think like there's such a way that we've created these spaces which are needed and necessary to like actually be the sort of containers and institutions that hold that knowledge. And what it also has meant is that people aren't interacting with these spaces in deep and meaningful ways in their everyday lives, right? So I feel like, getting people into the water does that work. Getting people out into nature does that work. Like I live here and I moved here in Northern California, and there are all of these like foraging communities, right? That go out into like the nature of California and are able to find like plants that grow here, right? Are in season. And I don't know any of that knowledge because I grew up going to a grocery store. Like there are just ways that like in the kind of quest for convenience, it's really disconnected us I think, as a species from our actual like animal nature. And I feel like to get back to that, we have to actually get back to those spaces and not see ourselves as separate from them, but integral to them and how they are integral to us. And I feel like the way that climate change is showing up right now is the rude awakening that we're not separate from the ocean, right? Like that we're not separate from the forest burning in California. That like when things happen in nature, when things happen in our environment, it impacts us deeply on every level. So I feel like we have to do more of that kind of work. And I feel like if we get back into those spaces and get back into those environments and the histories connected to those environments come up clearly in the exploration of that. And that goes for like Black and Indigenous histories of this land that I think we're so disconnected from.
Okay, but hear me out though. An underwater museum.
Come on.
I'm just saying, let's do it.
Come on. Like I've been playing around with a couple of colleagues, Justin Donovan and Sion Woolley Michael at the Smithsonian, really thinking through what it would look like. And Mo Dupuy as well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention her, thinking about, what it would look like to have like an underwater museum that was like specific for African diasporic history. Or we were thinking about the ways that people have transformed burial sites on land to sort of think about how we can like create sort of communal gardens underwater, right? Like, what would it look like to plant several like outcrops of like corals and things like that, and it be a space that you have to actually visit back to and tend to in a particular kind of way that gets you in the water more. I don't know what it looks like, but I definitely feel drawn to, and people always have been drawn to, the kinds of histories that are told underwater in really like unique and innovative ways.
Which is interesting that you bring that up, because we have the Neptune Memorial here in Miami, which I feel like is grossly underrated and people don't actually appreciate it as much as they should, or the concept of it as much as they should. Like, it's such a beautiful concept to think that I'm going to be buried in the ocean. Yeah. And then anytime anybody goes back to the ocean, it's kind of like you're visiting back, like the ocean is all connected. It's, so it's a really cool thought, which brings us to Home Sweet Homes asking, what is your dream project? So if you had to describe a dream project where everything goes according to plan, unlike in science, what would it be?
Right, unlike any time we do work. I feel like my dream project would blend both my terrestrial and underwater archaeology passion and desire, which means it's probably in the Caribbean. And it's a project that has many different components to it that's centered on, community wants and needs. Also brings about a kind of sort of like curiosity in children, a curiosity for the scholars themselves. Like, I don't know, like I'm trying to think. I'm like, am I talking about the project I'm on? I might be, but like I think it's, for me, it's like having the resources to actually like, get people in the water, give them the training to really be able to do this work and create a sustainable project where, you know, the history that's like recovered is theirs, you know, and how it's shared is theirs and how it's passed down is theirs. But yeah, I never thought about like if everything went right, where would I be?
I am, so what inspired you to found the Society of Black Archaeologists?
Yeah, so the Society of Black Archaeologists is the brainchild of Dr. Justin Dunavant, who's an assistant professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. And when he was a first year graduate student at the University of Florida, and I was a third year undergraduate student there, we both, after visiting a Black psychology conference that was held in Tallahassee in 2010 or 2011, saw that there was a group of like psychologists who were Black doing fantastic work in their discipline and really tending to the kind of complex histories of Black experiences in psychology, but also how the field has pathologized Blackness in many ways. And we thought about what it would mean to really build an organization that provided a network for African and African diasporic archaeologists, and also provided the kind of support for generative work on African diasporic sites, be them excavated by Black or non-Black archaeologists. And SBA was born from that seed of an idea. And since 2011, we've become a nonprofit in 2018, and we have over 300 members in the United States, South America, the Caribbean, the UK. We even have some members on the continent of Africa as well. So really trying to forge together a global network where we're able to be in conversation with a variety of scholars, both those who are in academia, those who do cultural resource management, students, community members who are interested in this work, who want work done in their own communities, to be able to gather. And then also in like, you know, specific circumstances, really thinking about how archaeologists, for instance, in like Francophone or Lusophone countries can come together, you know, and really think through these kinds of sort of questions around access and questions around patrimony and things like that, and really almost like crowdsource information to better their own sort of projects and direction in the field. So it really was born from that desire to create a space where both of us could thrive, and realizing that it wasn't just something that we desire, but something that so many archaeologists desire. But yeah.
So you guys have only been together a short while. What projects and what outreach do you have the next generation with this work through this project?
Yeah, like one of our sort of, you know, our dream project is the work that happens down at the estate Little Princess. And it's a project that really centers not only on like research questions around, you know, how Afro-Peruvians live their daily lives in relationship to the natural and cultural environment, but it also really roots in this desire to provide more cultural stewardship training for youth on island as well. So part of that collaboration is with Archaeology in the Community, which is a nonprofit run by Dr. Alexander Jones. And in that nonprofit, she really centers on providing educational training to high school students that actually come out to the site and excavate alongside us for a week. And through a grant that Justin and I secured under Cameron Monroe at the University of California, Santa Cruz, through the University of California HBCU initiative, we've been able to bring students from HBCUs down to St. Croix with us for 2018, 19, and then this past summer in 2022. and provide them with the educational opportunity that wouldn't have been afforded to them at their institutions, because anthropology itself, archaeology more broadly, is not taught at many HBCUs. I think Howard might be the only one that has archaeologists on their campus teaching. And even then, they don't have an anthropology department anymore. So, you know, the Estate Little Princess has really become the kind of outreach program that the SBA has, and we want to do more. You know, part of like what we're brushing up against right now is like the actual very real financial need that a lot of our members have, especially those on the continent of Africa, to attend conferences. Like the Society for Historical Archaeology has an international conference for 2023 in Lisbon, Portugal, and our members need funds to get there. So really just trying to figure out how can we be of service to our membership in ways that are generative and nourishing for them, and then for the organization as well.
Can I ask one more question? So does one need to be an archaeologist to be a member of this group?
Not at all.
That's good. I'm going to join. All right, cool.
Not at all, not at all.
So that actually sort of brings me to a question. What advice do you have for someone who's interested in maritime heritage or just archaeology in general, but doesn't know what to do? Like growing up, I would see Indiana Jones and I'd be like, that's cool. How do I get there though?
I definitely would say you can send an email to the Society of Black Archaeologists. You could send an email to Diving with a Purpose. Those contact pages are available on their website. You can send an email to NABS as well. Like, there are so many people who are here to provide training and access that it's really the ask, you know. Like I think that's like part of it. And then also just knowing that it's possible, like, and I think, you know, getting in the water, knowing that it's possible. I would definitely suggest, like, for students who are interested, high school students, to really think about the kind of programs that NABS and DWP offers for high school students to do maritime archaeology. I know DWP has a program with Key Biscayne National Park. There's also the DWP Cares program that does coral restoration work down in Key Largo as well. There's also the youth training components to both of those programs. And NABS also has youth training components in their programming as well. So there are lots of opportunities to really get students in the water and really, you know, start that journey for them. But definitely, you know, we get students who email SBA all the time, and we forward them the email addresses of folks who are in and around their areas. So if you send us an email and you're in Mississippi, then we can give you Jody Skipper's email address at Ole Miss and see if she's someone that could help you out. If you're someone who's in, you know, South Carolina, then we'll give you the email address for Anna Agby Davis and see, or Terry Wilk, and see if there's, you know, a connection that could be made there. So the network itself is really large, and we're here to make those connections for folks.
So let's change it a little bit. What do you do to relax and have fun?
What do I do to relax and have fun? I like to go to day parties.
Okay.
Yeah, so I like to dance. That's what I like to do. I like to dance to Afrobeat and house music, and it's how I can unwind and have fun. If I'm not doing that, I'm probably at home crafting. I make jewelry from time to time. I've been getting into other sorts of metalworking skills, which I'm really excited about as well. I also am someone who puzzles a lot, so I like do puzzles to unwind. And I'm an avid reader and Audible book devourer. So all of those things help me ground.
So you do, you already shared your book list with us. Is it something that you do for fun? Do you consider the scuba diving piece fun for you, or is it work?
I do consider the scuba diving piece fun for me, and it is work. And I've actually had many a conversation with my therapist about what it would mean to find things that are fun, that are not work related, which is also very hard. So if you look at even my Audible list consists of books that predominantly have to do with slavery, because that is the kind of research that I do as well. Yes, Rose. I know.
But it's all about your passion, though. That's what you're passionate about. So
it is. There's a passion for it. And also, as someone who's like currently writing a book, I now read books and listen to books for writing style. Which make the experience different as well. But if you ask my therapist, he would say, so you're reading for work, even more work now, but I digress. It is.
Okay, but now I'm curious, because you deal with some really heavy topics, like some things that can really just be depressing. I mean, I remember going through the Black History Museum in DC, and afterwards I was like, I need a hug. Like, this was just sad. Like, how do you deal with like such heavy and dark topics and still have like such an upbeat personality, and just like, what do you do?
Yeah. I get this question all the time. Now, I will say that while the work that I do focuses on slavery, the work that I do focuses on Black life, right? So my work as an archaeologist on land, I look at clothing and adornment practices that Black women engaged to really think about how they navigated racism, sexual exploitation, economic disenfranchisement, right? And I think about the ways in which Black people lived, right? So I think about how we were able to build community, right? I think about the ways in which Black women more specifically, put value on their bodies, even though they were told that their bodies were valueless, right? There's something about that actual act and process. Like, so even though the work is about slavery and the actual reality and hardships of it, it is also so much about the ways in which we lived as well. And how, if we think about the ways in which we lived and have that as our North Star, then we're actually able to think about how we're able to live today as well. So the work is hard, the work is challenging, and the focus on Black life is what keeps me in a space of joy. Because I'm an avid believer that we have always been able to cultivate those spaces, and we can find that in the archaeological record.
I'm gonna cry. It's time for a shameless plug. Do you have an expected release date for your book? So we can mark our calendars.
Come back to me in 2024. It's a minute off. Come back to me in 2024. But I just submitted a book proposal. I'm hoping that a press eats it up. So we'll see. But 2024, definitely.
I always feel encouraged whenever I am in your presence, whether we're in person or doing it or meeting this way. You're such a lovely, lovely person and inspiring as well. I'm good right now. I feel good. I'm encouraged about this next generation coming up and doing some things. You all are doing it. I love it. I love this.
And you're a part of that too. You're a part of that too, making it possible. So
I'm making the way for y'all. My time is over. It's time for you all to come up and do some stuff. This is amazing. I love this.
Thank you.
So I actually realized, as we're getting ready to sort of wrap it up a little bit, we asked the audience earlier, about what they thought about when they met Maritime Heritage. Maybe we'll just throw a few phrases at you. You could tell us what you think. One viewer said old navigational tools.
Hey, definitely. Oh, navigational tools. You'll find those at a shipwreck. Yeah.
One viewer said the relationship to the sea, to the boats, and the people who were boat captains, crew, and passengers.
Nice. I like that one.
Someone said to the people who relied on the sea for food, for commerce.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And our relationship to how maritime connected the worlds and towns.
Definitely.
And then the last person said, I think of small time sailors and navigators living sustainably with and for the sea.
That's a really sweet one. Definitely. I love those answers. I love the audience that's like engaged, educated about the topic, ready to discuss. That's awesome. That's awesome.
I think this was also just really great to see. At least for me personally, I never really had that terrestrial and the ocean and then that connection to history. Like I never thought of the ocean as a place that held Black history. Like we knew about the ships and we knew, we know about things that happened back then, but it was never like, oh, this is our history and now we're reclaiming it.
Yeah. And I'm the exact same way. And I feel like, one thing that I've been really excited for are all of the books, all of the children's books that have been written about or are in the process of like coming out, that do this work of like talking about our history in ways that introduce it to kids, and it's not something that like in my discipline, academia, they're like really excited for us to write children's books, but I get really excited for just the vast number of books that are available for like children and young adults that were just simply not available when I was a child. And I remember as a college student, I was collecting those books because I was like, oh my God, rare find. But now you can get them everywhere. Like now there are books everywhere.
Now they're on Audible.
Exactly. Like, so yeah, I just think, I'm really just grateful for the ways in which we are trying to feed that to our kids while they're young, which is why you also see things like banned books because of it, and other sort of indoctrination tactics that the other side also has to indoctrinate their children. So I think that we should continue finding these various outlets to share this work as well with the public. But yeah.
So because we want to be mindful of everybody's time when we're getting to a close, we want to thank you, Dr. Flewellen, so much for taking the time out of your evening to sit and chat with us in our community. I'm pretty sure I can speak with everybody that it's been super enlightening and amazing just to hear your story and your perspective on things. Thank you again so much for being here. And can you tell our audience how they can connect with you? Because I'm sure some of them might have questions afterwards, or I might just slide into your DMs too.
You can definitely find me online at ayanaflewellen.com, email address ayanaf@stanford.edu. Please do check out the Society of Black Archaeologists.com, divingwithapurpose.org. Also available. Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm also like on Instagram and Twitter, but I deleted those both from my phone. So gotta monitor the engagement.
That was smart. I need to do that too.
Yes.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah,
thank you. It was a great. Thank you. I enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.